Hi, everyone. This is Pivotal Practices, and we are on the 10th episode. And as I stated in the ninth episode, I'm so excited. We do have a special guest, and I do have a blessing to say that she's a dear friend of mine as well. And so, as I had stated too in the last episode, we're going to talk about boundaries. But I first want to introduce the special guest. So sitting next to me is Margaret, and she is a licensed social worker and a licensed counselor. And so I just wanted to have you introduce yourself to everybody.
Okay. My name's Margaret, and I have been in private practice for a number of years, and I see clients from about the age of 12 on up, mood disorders and relationship issues, boundary issues. Prior to that, I did hospice work and another love of my life. And that has really enriched my practice. And so I work privately and I serve clients.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we want to really talk about is a bunch of facets and things surrounding boundaries, but I feel like defining boundaries is super important. And so I wanted to ask you, especially because of your background, how do we really define boundaries?
Boundaries are present in all of our relationships. And I think a very simple way to define them is how do we set limits or guidelines within the relationship? And I think expectations is another way to say that. I think boundaries affect our relationships with our partners, at work, with extended family, with friends. And I think understanding what boundaries are and why they're important allows relationships to be healthier and happier.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like as I got older, I started realizing how important they were. Yeah. And I think it's like a natural progression for people to almost start to realize that in certain relationships, they're almost overextending or something's happening and something's out of balance. And it's almost through relationships that we start to realize we actually need to have concrete boundaries. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, concrete boundaries allow you to be able to be honest with a person. And I think oftentimes we're not aware of the need for boundaries until we feel like something's not healthy here. We're feeling uncomfortable, we're feeling overextended. Burnout is a really strong word, but that is present when we don't have healthy boundaries. I think that's more appropriate at work when we're not necessarily having healthy time around how long or when we answer emails or how we check the computer for messages or having to finish a project. And I think when we finally realize like something's wrong here, then we realize, okay, this is a need to set a healthier boundary, that what I feel about my work or my relationships is not helping me feel grounded and safe.
Yeah. So you already kind of did, but is there anything else you would say that people feel when a boundary is being broken, or even like it can be in their body, or like you're saying, being burnt out, as far as maybe feeling almost violated and upset? Is there anything else?
Yeah,
you
I
would
think
say?
unsafe comes to mind, right? In interpersonal relationships, when we don't feel heard or validated, we feel disrespected. There's a sense of uneasiness or restlessness in the relationship. I think there's also some anger, frustration that then comes out. And I think it leads to an unhealthy response on my end. And there's an emotional, physical connection. Our heads are connected to our bodies. I know that doesn't sound like rocket science, but what we think and feel affects our body as well. So oftentimes, if we pay attention, the proverbial gut response, listening to our gut, is really our intuition telling us that something isn't healthy or balanced for me here. And again, that can show up in any or all of our relationships, really. But I think paying attention to physically how we feel is the first warning sign to stop and pause and sort of reevaluate what is happening right with us in that current relationship.
Yeah. So I just want to bring up, like last podcast, we were talking about the crown chakra and being aware of the way we're behaving and how it affects people around us. I would also say part of the natural progression of life is learning boundaries to respect yourself enough, but also to respect others and also show love, not just through, oh, I respect that, or okay, I'll do that, but actually like actions, right? That my actions follow my responses, and actions speak louder than words. So I think it's natural to get older and understand the response of, oh, I actually need boundaries, but I also have to understand other people have boundaries too.
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the key part in boundaries is being able to say it in actions, as you said. When there's an incongruency between what is said and what is done, it oftentimes can cause confusion and frustration within relationships, right? So being able to be clear, how do we set boundaries, right? So if we define them as, a set of limits or guidelines around what is good for me, what I feel, what I need, my values. If we define them that way, then really the question is, then what do we do with that, right? Like, how do we set those boundaries? And I think, again, the beauty of how do you set boundaries, they're universal and transferable principles. It just, based on the relationship that you're having at the moment, you will modify the way you do what you do when setting boundaries based on the level of depthness of the relationship, right? So a more superficial relationship, you can use the tools, but you will define them differently than if it's in a deeper relationship, a more meaningful relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I also had wanted to touch base on is like the importance of being clear.
Yes.
Can we talk about the importance of maybe examples of what a boundary and saying it out loud would sound like, but also being clear, and then outside of being clear, making sure that you aren't codependent on the person's reaction. Yeah.
So I think before we can even really verbalize what our boundaries are or what our values are, we need to be aware, right? So self-awareness, I think, it starts there. Being aware of what do I need or want or value, and being able to understand that some things are negotiable and other things just are not, and being able to be aware of what those limits and boundaries are for me. So I think awareness, you start with it. And then I think your point's well taken, Teresa. I think when we're talking about how do I express those boundaries, being assertive in the way I give that information to whomever I'm with matters. And when I talk about being assertive, it's the words, the content of what I'm trying to say, but it also is the way I give it, right? And oftentimes, if I'm not comfortable being clear about my boundaries, I will fumble with the way I present it. So, for example, if I have a clear boundary around work and I want to have this conversation with my boss, I think I need to be clear about my time, my activities after hours, days and hours I'm willing to work, and then be able to say to my boss assertively and clearly why that doesn't work for me and the impact of that on me in my off hours, right? And so I think, saying it in a way that is assertive rather than edgy or aggressive or passive aggressive, if the messaging is off through the tone or the nonverbals, then the message gets lost, right? What I hear is the way you're giving it to me and not the message itself. And I think what matters the most is the content. But if I can't get past the messaging, the content gets lost.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Totally. And this is like an offshoot, but something that's worth discussing, like even speaking in boundaries as somebody who believes in Christ and has like been taught, Christianity. Sometimes we're taught, forgive, give. But I think there's a barrier on sometimes Christians when they're going to set a boundary, almost like not realizing that they're allowed to have boundaries, and it comes off more aggressive or as if they blow up sometimes because they are going too much. Well, I have to keep giving. It's almost a codependent release of their energy. When really, I feel like Christ was very clear on boundaries. And I know that this is like an offshoot, but I think that it's important for people to realize I can still be giving and loving and still have a set boundary.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when you find you're giving, when you talk about codependency, it means that I'm giving so much of myself to somebody else that my needs are lost, almost not existent in the relationship. And I think when we're giving more than we're getting, or it's not balanced, that may have started off as a healthy relationship, but can very quickly become toxic and become unhealthy, which means if I don't reset the boundary and be able to say, okay, look, this isn't comfortable for me any longer, then the relationship doesn't have a chance to succeed in a healthy way. Now, certainly, codependent relationships have existed since the time a long time ago, right? But are they healthy is really the question. And so being able to set limits around what I will give is a healthy choice for me and for the other person as well, right? The relationship isn't allowed to be healthy and grow when I'm participating in a way that isn't good.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're right. Overgiving is definitely a recipe for burning out.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, and then it also provokes other emotions and feelings in me, right? I get frustrated, I'm angry, I'm giving so much, I'm not really getting much back. And rather than being clear in the moment to say, wait, hold on a minute, can we have a conversation? I'm not comfortable with this. I act it out rather than say it.
Yes.
And then that just causes such a confusion both on the part of myself, because it's not the way I behave is not lining up with how how I say I want to be is not lining up with my responses. Yeah. And so now I don't feel very good about this. And not only that, but the person on the receiving end likely doesn't feel good as well.
Yes, and becoming resentful, which is a responsibility in ourselves, right? To, when we start feeling resentment, it's a sign that I'm either not communicating or I'm giving or I'm allowing. And I think there's nobody else that's going to clear resentment in our hearts, which can really hurt our body, mind, and soul, except for us.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when we talk about the brain-body connection, when I'm feeling distressed, angry, frustrated, resentful, my body has a physical response to that, right? Our immune system is in overdrive. GI disorders become apparent. Migraines, TMJ. There's a whole wealth of research out there that talks about when I'm in an emotional distressive state or in an overreactive state, my body is overreactive. And so the calmer, more loving, more assertive I can be, my body also responds to that as well. And so I think when you're thinking about boundaries, being clear, and that means being assertive, that means having my message and my messaging feel congruent, and then allowing my words to leave my boundary and land in somebody else's, whoever it is I'm talking with, gives them an opportunity to also receive me assertively. Now, please understand that when I haven't been used to setting boundaries and I start to look at this isn't working for me and I need to reset my boundaries or reevaluate what my needs are because they're getting lost here. When you set a healthier boundary, the person on the receiving end may be very confused.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%. And doesn't know how to respond.
Exactly.
Yeah. And often, unfortunately, sometimes gets offended. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the other part of that is then the tendency is to push back, right? Because I think the person on the receiving end, whether it's a boss, a coworker, a partner, friend, or family, they want you the way they've always had you, which isn't always healthy for you. And so when you make a healthier choice and sort of extend the boundary in a healthier way, so now I have room for me in this relationship and it's not all about the other person, there is a tendency to push back that boundary again, right? And so when we're thinking about how do I set it, being clear, rather than to push the boundary out here, I often say to clients, let's start setting it a little bit more, right? Let's set it to a point where I can maintain that boundary, because setting the boundary really is not the hard part, although that is a difficult part of this. It's maintaining it when the other person pushes back, and being able to hold your ground is a way for the other person to understand that you mean what you say. But when there's this incongruency between what I say and what I do, now we're confused again, and now we're back into the tendency to not think of my needs and think of the other person. And so it's really clear wherever you set the boundary that you're able to maintain it once you set it.
Yeah. Like being consistent, making sure that you're always consistent and making sure that no matter what ends up happening, that boundary is always kept up with, is super important. And like some of the most difficult situations, I think, are when a child starts to become an adult or is middle-aged and their parent is still treating them like a child, right? I think one of the toughest boundaries sometimes you can have is with your parents. As you start to age, it's like there's a learning curve for everybody, you know?
Well, and I think because we're growing, right, in a way that meets our need and develops our sense of self. When we have unhealthy boundaries, we lose that sense of self. We don't really know who we are. And then we struggle with trying to find that. And I think whether it's an adult parent with an adult child or it's another situation where we're in another relationship, I think being clear and have an understanding of, look, this may have worked before and I was okay with it, but now it doesn't work. And so now I want to reset it in a way that is healthy for both of us. And I think that's really true with parents and adult children. And I think parents don't always understand the needs of their adult child because they always will see you as a child. And so the understanding that they're growing and they need maybe less of me doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with me. It means that they're growing. And I think being able to not personalize the boundary, because it really doesn't have anything to do with the other person, it has everything to do with me.
Yeah. And you said something that had sparked something, so it'll probably come back to me in a moment. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about, here we go, is the respect. When we first start setting boundaries, I'm not trying to say this as if we don't want to uphold them. We want to uphold them, but we want to give a grace period. It's an adjustment for everybody. Yes. So that's why it's also important to uphold them, because you need to give people time for this change that's happened within you and that now has to change in the relationship. But a person who loves you and actions meet words will be responsive to that, or even go, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I'm trying to get used to this, or some kind of response that shows that it actually means something to them. Yeah.
Because I think in order to have a healthy relationship, you're going to go through seasons of change where our needs and our wants grow. And I jokingly say this, like when we're in our 40s, let's hope our needs are different than they were in our 20s, right? I mean, we grow and we change, and sometimes we get stuck, and that's okay to get stuck. It's just the mutual respect that develops through healthy boundaries is really pretty beautiful. And it allows you to self-love, where when you're in an unhealthy relationship or unhealthy boundaries, I don't feel very good about myself, and yet I get stuck and I kind of don't know how to get myself out of it. And so being able to have respect for myself, which then will spill over into the relationship.
Yes. I feel also like the different boundaries, as you're saying, with different things. So if you're even like me in a, as a body worker in a giving field, or even in your field, whether we're talking being a nurse or whatever type of field that's more like a caretaking field, one thing that sometimes can happen is we're very sympathetic and compassionate to people through their pain, but we cannot allow them to become codependent on us. The whole point is to empower them with tools to then become more powerful in themselves or confident in themselves, able to handle situations. But the changes still actually have to occur within the client, even though I'm still maybe providing a service. So I feel like even professionally, we also have to make sure that we don't allow people to become codependent on us. You know?
Well, because then what happens is what we talked about earlier, burnout happens. And I think part of preventing burnout from a practitioner's point of view is making sure that we are taking care of ourselves outside of our work environment, right? Again, it goes back to what do I value? And if I value myself and I value my emotional, mental, physical well-being, then I'm going to do things that bring me joy. I'm going to engage in relationships that make me happy and that have a mutual love and respect with each other. I'm going to work out and take care of my body because our brains are connected to our bodies, and our body tends to hold stress longer than we're even aware. And I think when we're not sure where the boundary is, being able to take care of our body, like what comes first, chicken or the egg? It doesn't matter. Let's be in both lanes. Let's take care of our emotional well-being while we're taking care of our body, and the two together will make us stronger, both as a practitioner and as part of a relationship.
Yes. I 100% agree. And I think that a lot of times when people come to me and say, well, how do you stay so balanced? I'm like, because I have to practice what I preach.
Yes.
Yeah, like I have to make sure that I feel fed. I have to take out my time to take care of my body, mind, and soul. And there's also this beauty of knowing that you can really care and love people and give into your work, but there's also a time frame, like you're saying. There's a boundary on my time frame where I will respond to clients, or so that I have my downtime and that can be respected. Because people might unintentionally not even realize sometimes how much they're crossing boundaries until they're actually like given, And so I feel like you train people how they treat you. What are you willing to take is also the way that you teach them, okay, am I willing to take that? Or no, I'm not willing to take that. That is an important thing for us to realize, is that I'm also like responsible along with that. But I feel also, when is it that we know that somebody's not respecting boundaries? And even if it's a family member or in an intimate relationship, to a point that it's okay for us to say this relationship is no longer beneficial for me. And that doesn't mean that I haven't forgiven them or that I don't care about them. But what would you say about that?
Well, I think forgiveness, let's define that, right? It's a internal response. It's something that I do. If somebody has wronged me, it's an internal process. It has nothing to do with the other person. It has everything to do with me and my want to not carry the residual effect of being unforgiving, resentment, frustration, trauma, self-loathing, disrespect for myself and my body. And so if I can process through that, and that's a whole nother podcast, but if I can work on forgiving, it doesn't always necessarily mean we reconcile. So forgiveness being an internal response and reconciliation being external. And so when you've gone through the process of being self-aware of what my needs and boundaries, expectations are in this relationship, and I've clearly said and discussed over again what those are, and there's been a boundary violation, it goes to sort of the process of how we set boundaries. There's consequences when someone doesn't, over a period of time, respect my boundaries after I've been clear. And sometimes I think we need to be clear in multiple ways. So if we say it once, I think, and it's not received the way we intended, then I think we repackage it, right? And we give it another way. The grace that we want to give the person that we're in a relationship with. And the amount of grace you will give will depend on the depth of the relationship, right?
Yes.
And so if somebody continually violates a boundary, and we've talked about it, then I think the consequences are how you define them. And it might mean a disconnect in some way from the relationship. It's not an all or nothing equation, right? It's not a we're together or we're not. It could be a little bit more of a separation in terms of an extended family member. Maybe I set better boundaries around how much emotional time I will give you and reset that, or how much time I'm willing to spend at your home or in a family holiday. I get to set those. So I think it really matters. And it's going to be, I think, too, also determinant on what the boundary that's being violated, right?
Yes.
And I think the deeper the boundary or the more important boundary, and we have levels of boundaries because our values are not always at the same level of depthness, right? There's some values I have that are more negotiable than others. But when it's a deep violation of a boundary repeatedly, I think you really need to look at, is this healthy for me to stay in it this way? And I think when you reevaluate that relationship and reset those boundaries, please know that you're doing it for you. And if I don't do it, I will lose myself in this relationship. And I think there's one of the barriers that I commonly hear is the guilt that people feel in setting a healthy boundary with a family member. Because I think we come from the point of view of it's an all or nothing equation. And I often say there's levels of gray in most things. You get to decide the gray, and then you can execute it. And I think it's important to let the person know why you're behaving in the way and what your new expectations are of the relationship. But I think, Teresa, when we act from an emotion of guilt, we make a decision based on an emotion rather than fact of the matter, right? I don't think those decisions go very well for us. They may go very well for the person on the receiving end because they get to have what they want from me or from us. But I think when we're making a thoughtful, mindful choice, one from a place of love, not from a place of anger or resentment, the decision will be a good decision.
Yeah. I've noticed it's natural, I think, at first, just being a human being, feeling, especially if you're a giving person, when you're getting used to boundaries, that you feel guilt. But it's not something that you want to continue to feed into, right? Like we want to be logical, but we still need to tune into our hearts. We don't allow our emotions to rip the floor out from underneath us. They are something that guides us, but we still need to be logical. And sometimes even removing ourselves from the situation as if it was a friend or somebody we loved. And if they were actually dealing with this situation, would I think that they were being respected? What would be my advice to them? And sometimes I think that people need to almost step outside of themselves in a more logical way at first when they're getting used to it, to then go, oh no, I wouldn't let my friend go through this. I wouldn't want them to go through this at all. You know?
Well, and guilt is a big is a big motivator for many things that we do in our life. And I say that's not a loving place to make a decision. That's not a mindful, purposeful place to make a decision. But setting boundaries is hard because we're needing to change the way this dynamic flows in this relationship. And I think change is hard for most people. And it goes to having, whether we have weak boundaries where we give more than we get, or we're emotionally available to families beyond time that makes us feel good, or we have very rigid boundaries that are not sustainable. Moving to the gray and being able to make thoughtful choices really is where the growth is. But, I often say, if it's uncomfortable, I think we need to do more of it because that's where the growth is.
Yes.
If we're doing things for fear of the other person's response, then we don't make healthy choices for us. And when we make choices that are good for us, there will be a response. And it oftentimes isn't a welcome response, right? Because you're asking for different things in the relationship. And the other person, may be reluctant to give it, or you're worried that they won't like you or they won't view you in the same light. It's okay. If we make choices based on fear, or what if, then it keeps us stuck in a really unhealthy place.
Yes.
So being able to step into my truth and speak my truth, because my truth matters. And as long as I'm speaking my truth in a kind, loving, assertive manner, what you do with those words is irrelevant to me.
Yes.
Because it's about me at that point, not about you. And I would love it if you heard me. I would love it if you respected my boundaries and adjusted. But that's not always the outcome. And I think if that's not the outcome, we give a little time for change, right? For grace.
Yes.
But then we have to decide what to do.
Yeah, and it's okay to be uncomfortable.
For sure.
Like
most things are.
Yeah, almost everything you go to do
Yeah.
that's new, you're
Yeah.
uncomfortable in life. And being uncomfortable and raw with people in a vulnerable way is how relationships grow. It's
Yes.
also how we learn trust. It's how we learn respect. It's how we learn. We are relational beings. So I always feel like it's so important for people to go, it's okay that I feel uncomfortable. It's okay that there's a little bit of nervousness or fear. In fact, that actually might mean that I care. And that's not a bad
Yes.
thing.
Yeah,
you know?
because relationships go through changes, right? We're evolving as we age, and that means that our needs and wants change. And if we don't verbalize that to the person that we're with, you're sort of being dishonest, both with yourself and with the person. And being honest and speaking your truth in a kind way says to the world, I matter. And you do matter. You do matter. And your feelings matter. And when I deny myself the opportunity to speak my truth, that has no good outcome for me. I am more anxious. I am more distressed. I don't sleep well. Again, here comes the physical responses of not being truthful and honest with people. Here's the beauty of it is once the boundaries are set and they're healthier, oh my gosh, the sky's the limit for that relationship, right? Like
Yes.
the connection is stronger. The connection allows you as a group or as a couple or as a family to sustain really hard situations that naturally occur as we age. We pull together because there's a foundation that's been established based on trust and love rather than uncomfortability and kind of truths and not really being transparent or saying one thing and doing something else.
Yes, and I feel like resentment happens when you're not clear. Like when I have expectations that I'm not speaking out, I get resentful and mad at you. And then my ego mind starts to almost formulate self-limiting beliefs about you or a relationship instead of like how is that person ever supposed to actually make amends with me or make things okay if they don't even know what's going on inside of me? And then it's really not their fault. It's my fault.
Right.
You know?
Right. And that's where the
Yeah.
truth comes in. And if we're not speaking our truth, it doesn't give the person the opportunity to meet you in the middle. You're cutting off the relationship before its expiration date has arrived, right? Yeah, because I think when we're assigning meaning to your behavior, somebody else's behavior, without stopping and asking, "Hey, this doesn't feel right. Can you explain that again?" Or "I'm confused by your response. Can you clarify?" It doesn't give the person the opportunity that to say that I on the receiving end may have misinterpreted the response or misinterpreted the message. And I think a healthy relationship allows me to ask that question because I don't want to walk away from a situation or a conversation feeling terrible. I'm assigning meaning to you. That's not fair. Right?
Yes. And we come from different backgrounds. One of the most beautiful things I feel like I have learned, even in my marriage, but also in other relationships, are, women look at things a little differently. We just have a different inside. We're just come from a different place. Men come from a different place. We communicate differently. And sometimes we can take each other wrong. And then when you're sitting down and you're being vulnerable and intimate in your conversation, to be like, well, I don't understand what you meant by that. Or I felt like you said this and that's what you meant. And the other person's like, not at all. And then your anger can melt away because really you might be saying something in a completely different way, which is what they wanted to hear, but they didn't understand that that meant the same thing.
Right.
And so I feel like constructive communication is so important. And then it makes, like you're saying, the relationship become more in depth and more beautiful.
Stronger, right.
And you also stop getting so angry or have this firecracker go off inside of you then when your spouse or the people that you love are talking, and instead you're like, maybe I need to ask for clarity, because there's been a lot of times I've learned now through my experience that I might be receiving that wrong.
Yeah, and that's the intuition piece, right? Your body will often have a physical response to something distressing before our head gets it. But our head wants to go, 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 go. Our body says, slow down, take a breath. But we don't listen. And when we don't listen, we walk away from those conversations feeling hurt, frustrated, angry, because we think we thought we heard, right? Right? The thinking and the assigning meaning part is often distorted because we're not thinking that way, right? We're imagining what they're saying without asking, did you mean it this way? What happened here? And I think if we can resolve that closer to in the moment, there really isn't any residual anger or resentment because we're checking it out in the moment. And that allows us both to be closer. The connection is stronger. The vulnerability creates a sense of trust and love, where if I walk away feeling angry, that opportunity is missed.
Yes. Yes. So I'm just going to peek at this and see if there was anything. Is there anything that you felt like that else that we needed to talk about just for today with the subject that you might have had written
Yeah,
down?
I would like you to. I would like you to just realize that through the work of being aware and working on how I'm communicating my needs, that practice, right, creates healthy relationships. Healthy boundaries naturally create healthy relationships. And then as a result, I'm happier. My body feels better. I'm paying attention more. I'm not driving past the exit because I'm full of so much frustration or anger that I'm not paying attention to what I'm doing. It really creates a sense of mind, body, spirit that is healthy and grounded. And I can't say that loud enough. I know the practice of learning to set healthy boundaries is troubling or unsettling when you first start to do it. But what I want you to focus on is the beauty of what will come, that this uncomfortability is really temporary.
Yes.
Really temporary.
And I think I just want to reiterate, like, how she was saying consequences. Like, you can't forget about that. So sometimes when I have had to deal with, let's just say, people that are codependent and are constantly texting me daily and won't stop, and it's like all day or book texts, you can stop responding. You can say, I've made it clear, I don't get texts from anybody every single day or this many. If it hits a certain point, I'm just not going to respond. You don't have to keep saying that. Then just stop responding. You can stop responding. You can block them for a little while. There's things that sometimes you have to do with consequences as the person's also learning. Sometimes it's a little bit harder, I would say, with codependent people, but over time, they'll get it. Right? I've learned when I allow myself to be codependent on people's reactions or not uphold my boundary, I'm also not allowing God to work on them and teach them something. Because I'm always trying to then say, well, I'm sorry, or I'm doing whatever, and I'm this. And I'm like, sometimes it's okay to let them be left where they're at and learn to develop in life without you being involved. And that's how all of us grow. Just like when my son graduated high school, it was time for me to let go of the reins more, right? And even now it's like, what was I doing at 19? What was I doing at 20 years old? How much freedom did I have? Did I come home early? No. Right? I had to, at a certain point, we have to go, okay, now I need to release the reins and let God and the world now have a chance to kind of also help my kid learn and be raised. Because that was the whole point of why I spent so much hard work on him while he was growing up, right? Yeah.
Well, and I think having the confidence to be able to stop texting or set a boundary, whatever it may be, with responding to messages that come in late, being able to say it's okay. I will grow as a person and feel more confident, feel more self-assured. My self-worth goes up when I have healthy boundaries. It's one of those hidden benefits, right, of learning how to do it. And when you set the boundary, maintaining it in a way that is good for both of us. The self-esteem and self-worth and the value I see in me grows exponentially as a result of that.
Yeah. I would say as we're going to start to wrap this up, statements that maybe it just helps people with their verbiage. Like, I am offended that you did this. I want you to, like when we're talking in a defensive manner to set a boundary, we're going to get a defensive response. Instead, when you do this, I feel this way. It's really healthy for me if you could, and this is a boundary that I'm setting, right? It's like I need to choose my words wisely, and it's okay to pause.
For sure.
It's okay to pause and gather yourself and like tune into yourself, and you can even tell the person, I just need a moment so I can effectively communicate with respect and love, right? I think nowadays people don't offer themselves the space to pause.
Well, and pausing to say, you know what, let me get back to you. I'm not sure, let me get back to you. Or, I'm really confused right now. I'm really hurt by what I heard. Can you explain? Is a way to be assertive in giving somebody feedback when what they're saying or doing is violating your boundary. So I think, as we've talked, being assertive means I'm going to come from a loving place. I'm going to state my truth and what I need rather than how I feel about what you did. I'm going to be clear that I need more space or I need more connection with you or I need to not respond after a certain time at night. It's not personal. It's just I have things of my own I need to do. However you decide to set the boundary, having confidence in setting it allows you to help to maintain it as well.
Yeah.
And if you're being assertive in what you're asking for, and the person has a dysregulated response, meaning an aggressive response, for example, you can back up, but the answer is, this is my boundary, right?
Yes.
Not, okay, fine, we'll go back to the way we were, because that may be what that person intends or wants. But the idea of this is to set it so that you can maintain it and feel confident, because if you don't speak your truth, the other person doesn't have an opportunity to engage.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. So if you have any interest, I always say body work is phenomenal. That's one part of healing trauma. That's one part of also alleviating and preventative care for disease. But as I've said, when people come to me, I'm not a counselor, right? They have to tell me a certain amount of sentences or a certain amount of minutes that I give them to tell me what's going on so that I can help them, so that I can actually do my work proficiently. But as far as pairing holistic remedies for really having bigger breakthrough, counseling is huge. And I always say, don't underestimate that you can go to counseling at different times throughout your life. It's super impactful to gather tools. And it's also, again, something that I can recognize my need for at times. And pairing a counselor with a body worker is really beneficial, I have learned, for a lot of my clients. So if you want to have a session or also come to start seeing Margaret, please reach out to me if you're one of my clients and you watch the podcast. She's amazing at what she does.
Thank you.
As you can tell, it's very easy from even just listening to her. And then I just want to thank you so much for coming today. Yeah.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah.
This is really my life work.
Yeah. And we'll have to have you back.
I'd love to.
Yeah. We can talk about all sorts of really good, interesting things. Remember, you can hit subscribe if you want to subscribe. That'll also tell you when new podcasts have been released. And then always speak life into yourself and into others. We hope that this podcast empowers you and gives you amazing tools. And as always, have a beautiful, blessed day. Take care.